it's Maisie, and today I'm going to teach you guys about freshwater sources and why they're so important. So basically, a freshwater source is anything that's not saltwater or brackish water. So basically not the ocean or anything too close to the ocean. Now, freshwater sources are really important to us because they're where we get all our drinking water. You think we have a lot of water here on Earth, but our freshwater sources are actually only 1% of our water. So there are two main types of freshwater sources, and that's surface water and groundwater. So surface water is what you typically think of. It's like lakes or rivers or streams, basically water that's on the surface of the earth that you can see that is fresh water. Now there are three types of surface water. There's perennial surface water, which means it's there year-round. Think of most lakes. I mean, they're there in the winter, they're there in the spring, they're always there. Those are perennial bodies of water. Then there's ephemeral bodies of water, which means they're only there for some of the year. The example I usually think of when I think of this is like snowmelt rivers. These are rivers that are caused when the snow on the tops of the mountains starts melting in summer and the water comes down the mountain. So obviously in summer they're there when the snow's melting, but then in winter when everything freezes up, there's no river there, so that's an ephemeral body of water. So the third and final category of surface water is man-made bodies of water. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically any body of water that a person is creating or causing. So for example, a reservoir, when someone builds a dam on a river and this big lake fills up, is a man-made body of surface water. So the main thing that affects the quality of surface water is pollution, and one of the major ways this surface water can become polluted is due to runoff. So what that means is basically when rain runs down, sometimes it'll fall on surfaces that won't absorb it. So for example, if rain falls on like grass, that's a permeable surface. The rain will just soak into the soil and be happy. But if the rain falls on, say, like a parking lot, it'll roll along the parking lot until it gets to somewhere where it can join a stream or go somewhere. And as it's rolling along the parking lot, it's going to pick up debris, dirt, any oil that's leaked out of cars. And this can be a big issue. So here I have a cutting board with a little bit of food coloring at the top, and I'm going to show you how water can pick up pollution when it's running over pavement or another surface that won't absorb it by putting some water here, and you'll see it roll down the cutting board and pick up the food coloring as it passes. So you see how the water is sort of red when it's running through? So imagine if this was rainwater running across a parking lot. It'd be picking up all the oil and gasoline that might have leaked, or really anything that's been on the parking lot, and then that's going to go into our waterways and our freshwater sources, like lakes and reservoirs that we drink out of. So moving on to our second major type of freshwater source, groundwater. So you've probably heard this called aquifers before. A simple way to explain them is they're basically like underground lakes. Now, this sounds like a really weird concept, but you've probably experienced something similar to this, say if you've ever gone to the beach. So if you think about it, when you're sitting on the beach, on the sand, a decent ways from the ocean, if you start digging, you're gonna find water eventually. This is because there's something called the water table. That's basically a flat line of water that's at a steady height, and the ground can be above the water table or below it. So when the ground's below the water table, we see water. We see lakes or oceans. When the ground's above the water table, that means that the water is underneath the earth and we're not seeing it. So I'm going to illustrate this by showing you guys a little mini aquifer I've made using just some sand and some water and some food coloring in my house. So you can see how the water is at a constant level, but on points the sand comes above the water and it's just sort of dry land. So that's a really easy way to imagine how aquifers and the water table work. So one of the things that makes aquifers such a great water source is that as this water is flowing through the aquifer, and often through rocks and pebbles and sand, like in my example, the water is actually getting filtered out, and any particles that are in it are getting filtered out. So this water is often much more naturally pure than water you'd find in, say, a lake, where it's going to be mixed in with dirt and stuff. So there are two types of aquifers. There are confined aquifers and unconfined aquifers. So the difference between these two types is pretty simple. In a confined aquifer, that means that the layer of rock or sediment above them is like really hard. Like say it's a big rock, you can't get to it directly, it's confined. Unconfined aquifers are covered up by something loose like soil where you could just dig to it and find it. So in my beach example, that's sort of like an unconfined aquifer. So now let's get to the part of this video that's applicable to you guys. Let's talk about the freshwater sources in Texas. So one of the main freshwater sources throughout all of Texas is actually an aquifer. It's called the Edwards Aquifer. It's huge, it runs beneath a lot of Texas, and it's a really good source of water for a lot of different towns and cities because since it's an aquifer, it doesn't dry up fast in droughts. So like in West Texas, where they're really prone to droughts, this aquifer is a great water source for them. However, in Dallas, we actually don't use this aquifer very much. That's because the part that's located below us and is therefore accessible to us is actually not the cleanest water. So instead, we rely on reservoirs off the Trinity River. These reservoirs include the Louisville Reservoir, the Ray Roberts Reservoir, the Tawakoni Reservoir, the Greenville Reservoir, the Ray Hubbard Reservoir, and the Fork Reservoir. Now I hope you've learned a lot from this video about where our water comes from and the different freshwater sources that can provide it. And also, I hope you remember that fact about how it's only 1% of the water on Earth is fresh water we can drink. That just helps you remember why it's so important to conserve water. So thank you guys so much for watching.